Hello chess friends. In this video I'm going to be showing you a game that I just played against this new chess bot on chess.com called Mittens. Now this thing's been getting a lot of attention because it's been beating some very strong players, including Hikaru Nakamura. So I thought I'd play this thing. I did not expect to win or even get a draw. And I actually played 2 games against it. My first game I'm not going to show you because I lost pretty quickly. I made a rather silly blunder. But my second game, somehow I was able to draw, which really surprised me. Because if this thing can beat strong players like Hikaru Nakamura, how is it possible that I even could get a draw? Now, I did take more time in my game than he did. I think he was playing it close to blitz time controls. He was moving pretty quickly. I spent probably about 45 minutes total on my game, but I was not that impressed with the way Mittens played. It kind of reminded me of playing Stockfish at level 6 or so on leechess.org. In analyzing the game with Stockfish 15, it made some moves that Stockfish immediately didn't like, and at one point it was even losing, which I failed to capitalize on and made some mistakes, and then at one point I was losing, and Mittens failed to punish me. So I'm just going to get right into it and show you what happened. So I had the white pieces, and I began with e4, and we had an extremely mainline Ruy Lopez. So I'm not going to explain these moves too much, since they are by far the most popular moves in this opening. And we don't have a deviation from the main line until Mittens decides to play this slightly unusual h6 move. More popular here would have been knight to a5, but this is a move and it prevents a piece from going to g5, presumably. I'm not sure why that's so important right now, but I just went ahead with d4, with rook e8, and then knight b to d2. The bishop goes to b7. So I play knight to f1, a very standard maneuver in this opening, looking to go to g3, and then maybe hop to f5, which is a particularly juicy square for that knight since this bishop is no longer guarding that diagonal. And now we have knight a5 from Mittens, which Stockfish immediately thinks is bad, and it thinks I should capture on e5, allowing the e4 pawn to fall. And then it gives this line bishop c2, and then the knight can be defended like this, and now it's saying knight to e3. And for some reason white is doing very well here, maybe even winning. I'm not really even sure why. I would probably need to study this position more in depth. But I just played bishop c2 here. Seemed logical getting out of the view of that knight, adding some defense to e4. Okay, Mittens takes on d4, c takes d4, and then strikes the center with c5. I was definitely considering d5 at this point, which is what Stockfish thinks is winning for white. Knight c4 can be played, you just kick the knight, maybe it goes back, and now it's saying a4. I guess because I've gained a lot of space, this bishop's blocked, so white's winning, at least according to Stockfish. But I instead played knight to g3, which isn't bad, but just not as good as pushing the pawn. We have c takes d4, knight takes d4, the rook goes to the open file, makes sense. Knight d to f5, hopping onto that beautiful square, maybe looking to take out that dark squared bishop. Now Mittens plays knight c4, which is a losing move according to Stockfish, which says he should have played bishop f8. I played b3, and after knight to e5, apparently I have a winning position by taking out the bishop. And after queen takes e7, then bishop b2. And now apparently black should play g6 to keep the knight off f5. And why this is so good for white, I don't know. Stockfish is saying 2.75 pawns in white's favor. I mean, it looks good for white, but why it's that decisive, I don't know. This pawn's pretty weak. You got the bishop duo pointed towards the king side. Okay. But instead of taking on e7, I played bishop a3. I was kind of hesitant to trade off this beautiful knight, even though it can be replaced with another knight. I guess I thought this was such a bad piece for black that getting rid of it wouldn't really make sense, but that is the strongest move because it is a key defender of the d6 pawn and some kingside squares if it drops back to f8. Which is what Mittens played on the next move. And at this point, I started to think I should have taken out that bishop. But the game goes on. Here I played rook to c1, adding some defense to the bishop. It's not a bad move. If you take on d6, then there's bishop takes, and then rook takes c2, queen takes, and then queen takes d6, getting the 2 minor pieces for the rook. And the engine says black's not winning, but I didn't want to go down that road. I wanted to make sure my bishop on c2 had adequate protection. So now d6 is hit by my 3 pieces. Mittens defends with rook e6, bit of an awkward square for the rook. And now for some reason I drop my knight back to e3. At this point I was thinking maybe at some point I'd jump into d5. Mittens drops his knight back, opening the file so the rook and his knight and his bishop are all hitting e4, which I defended with queen to d4. Now we got queen to b6, offering the queen trade. I defend with the rook so that after queen takes, rook takes, e4 still has enough protection. And now we got g6 from Mittens. Doesn't want any knight going to f5. I played f3 here. This pawn was a target, so I wanted to have it defended by a pawn, so I didn't have to worry about it anymore. Now d5. That's a nice move. Hitting e4 with another piece, also opening up an attack on my bishop. So bishop takes f8 is pretty much forced. We got king takes f8. And then I took on d5. Bishop takes, pawn takes, attacking the rook. And I have an extra pawn for the moment, but after rook d6, there's not a good way to hang on to that pawn. This bishop is pinned. If it moves, I will lose my rook. So I move my rook back to d1 just to unpin this bishop so I can move it somewhere. Then the rook takes on d5. And apparently best here for me would have been bishop to e4. I wasn't so excited about putting the bishop where it could be captured by a knight. The engine's giving rook takes c1, rook takes. And then knight takes e4 is possible, but it thinks rook d2 is better. What I played in the game was not good though, because after bishop b1, the same kind of thing happens. Rook takes c1, rook takes c1, rook to d2 is apparently a bit worse because this bishop here is just not really doing a whole lot. And it actually just becomes a target for black in a move or two. I played knight to f1, hitting the rook. Now we got rook b2. So both my bishop and rook are tied down. If the bishop moves, I lose the pawn. If the rook moves, well, forward anywhere, I'm going to lose my bishop. Here I played knight to e3. And now we have a strange move from Mittens. King to g7, moving the king away from the center. I'm not really sure what that accomplished. Stockfish likes rook e2 here, attacking the knight. But after king g7, I came up with a kind of a stupid plan. What I should have played here apparently was knight d1, attack the rook, and then go back to f2. A draw by repetition would be fine here because Stockfish thinks black has almost a half pawn advantage here due to the aggressive placement of his rook. I played knight c2 though, thinking, aha, I've trapped your rook. How is he ever going to go anywhere? Just completely missing the threat of knight d5 and then knight c3, which I just can't allow or I'm losing my bishop. So I played knight e1 so that the rook is covering c3. But now there's knight f4 with some uncomfortable pressure on g2. I played king to h2. And now Mittens could win with the move knight to f6. And here's the line by Stockfish. It's saying a4. And then the knight ends up going to e3. The bishop can get out of dodge. You should even sacrifice the b pawn according to Stockfish because black's best move is not to even take that pawn. It's to target g2 with these two knights and the rook. White is just completely busted here. But Mittens did not play that. He plays rook to e2. And I played a4. Black is still quite a bit better here, probably winning. But after b takes a4, b takes a4, knight b6, now I have chances. The knight's under attack, so I just pushed it forward. The engine thinks bishop d3 right away is better. I played that on the next move. Now black could get the two minor pieces for the rook here with rook takes e1, rook takes, knight takes d3. Black's a bit better here, but the two knights versus the rook isn't such a big problem. Another option for black is taking on d3 this way. Knight takes. If you take that pawn, well, there's rook a1. Once the knight moves, we can grab the pawn, so you're not really losing a pawn there. If black tries to go after my pawn, then I can do it this way. Once the knight moves, I'm going to grab a6. Either way. So playing that bishop d3 right away was probably best. I threw in this a5 move first, which lets him get his knight closer to the action. Maybe that's why it's a little inferior, but at this point I played bishop d3. And then the same kind of thing happened. Knight takes d3, knight takes d3, rook goes to a2. But here I don't get to come to c6 with an attack on a b6 knight. So I'm not going to be winning this pawn. So I have to just defend with rook c5. And the pressure continues with knight to e3, hitting the g-pawn. Fortunately, I have knight e1. I can defend. And now rook e2, hitting the knight. Got to defend with the rook, or g2's falling. Actually, I don't, because the computer says king g1 here is maybe the best move. After rook takes, you got king to f2. You're going to get your piece back. That rook cannot continue to defend the knight. So that's an interesting little line that I missed. Instead, I played the obvious rook c1, defending the knight. And now Mittens plays g5. I'm kind of tied up here. Knight's tied down to defending g2. Rook's tied down to defending the knight. Now these pawns are going to start advancing. I don't really want h4. I decided to be active with h4 myself. The engine still likes king g1. And this rook can maybe go somewhere due to the threat of king f2 if rook takes knight, like we talked about. But h4 is not too bad. Mittens takes, and then I play king h3. I'm going to grab this pawn, Unless he defends with knight to f5, which he didn't, then I kind of untie myself. I can play knight to d3. And this pawn structure is so bad that it's not even really worth the extra pawn. That's really nothing to worry about for white. So rook d2 is what was played instead. I grabbed the pawn on h4. Now rook d5. Hitting the a5 pawn. Rook a1 defends. Now f5. Maybe looking to go to f4. So the king does not have an easy way to get back towards the center. So I played king g3. It's going towards the center of the board. Rook d4 for whatever reason. Rook to a2. I thought it'd be good to get my rook on this rank here so there's no more rook d2 with pressure on the g-pawn. So now we have f4 check. King goes to f2. Alright, so Mittens starts getting his king into the action. Here I played g3, taking advantage of the fact that this knight would be lacking protection if the pawn takes, and we'd have king takes e3. No good for black. What's played here by Mittens is knight to d1 check. Can't go to e2, or there would be a fork. So I went to g2. Now we have knight e3 check, king f2, knight d1 check, king g2. And I'd be happy to have a draw by repetition here, but Mittens doesn't go for it. He moves the rook to d6. I'm not exactly sure why. Maybe he sees some variation where that pawn is going to need protection. I went ahead and took on f4, knowing that I probably wouldn't be able to hang on to that extra pawn after king to f5. I defended it for a moment with rook to a4, but now there's knight c3 hitting the rook. I wanted to keep protection of my a5 pawn, so I moved the rook to a3, attacking the knight. Rook d2 check, king goes to f1. Now knight d5, going after the f4 pawn, which allows me to play rook d3, forcing the trade of rooks. You know, if this rook moves, then I'm picking up the knight. So he plays rook takes rook, knight takes rook. Interestingly enough, Mittens does not take with the knight. He plays knight e3 check. But this is a dead drawn position. King to f2, knight c4. He'd rather have this pawn here, but fortunately I can play knight c5 and grab this pawn. Knight takes a5. And I correctly assessed that this should be a dead draw. Even if I defend my pawn with my king, these pawns are really not worth 2 pawns because they're doubled and they're just getting in the way of each other's advancement. So I thought instead of defending this pawn with one of these king moves, I'd play it ultra safe, take black's passed pawn, and now it's a pretty easy draw. The king takes on f4, I deliver a check, and we see the following moves. All I have to do is eliminate this pawn. I can even sacrifice my knight for it and it'll be a draw. But I don't even have to do that. I chase the king around. I end up going after it with my king. He's going after my knight, so I play here with a check. He goes here. I go here, targeting h6. He throws in a check, but after king h5, king takes f4. Now I grab the pawn. And this is a draw. So how was I able to draw against the great and powerful Mittens when it's been defeating players that are a lot stronger than me? I mean, I'm not a grandmaster. I'm not even a master. My conclusion is that I either got really lucky or that maybe my strength is increasing as a result of all the chess analysis that I've been doing and making these videos, even though I haven't been playing. Or another idea I had is that maybe this Mittens program actually will adjust its strength based on who it's playing. When I played on chess.com, I was not even logged in under a profile. I was just playing as a guest. Maybe when it's playing a player like Nakamura, who has a strong rating, it plays at a higher level. So who knows? I'm curious to see more games played by a greater variety of players against this Mittens program. If you've played it, let me know how the game went. Let me know if you're able to draw or even win, and what your rating is. I would definitely be curious. But from my experience, this thing is not what I would call a formidable opponent. It's nothing like playing Stockfish at full strength, I'll tell you that. But anyway, thanks for watching. Subscribe to this channel if you want to see a lot more interesting chess content coming your way soon. See you on the next one.